Disney theme park characters. Had there been situations where you had to break character? What was the reason? 10 plus years ago, my friend was a face character at Disneyland and told me about her friend who was friends with Goofy, which is what you say to people when out of costume to preserve the magic instead of outright saying you're the character. Allegedly, one day, Goofy's shift was over, and he was trying to walk to the back area to cool off, when a very angry mom started yelling at him because he ignored her son. In reality, he couldn't see them as he was turning to walk away. The lady then called him racist, and said that Goofy was ignoring them because they were black. Goofy turned around to greet the child and signed his autograph book, and then turned to the mom, and he slipped up his sleeve to quickly point at his own black skin underneath before walking away. We now have a Discord. Check out the server in the link in the description. Story 2. I wasn't a character, but was a cast member. I was walking from backstage into the park. If you've seen the transitions, they are S-shaped to keep people from peeking in. I was pushing a dolly/handcart. The ones we used had 2 long supports sticking out from the end. As I was going through, Winnie the Pooh was walking in from the other side. I hit them square in the leg with it. Hearing Winnie the Pooh drop the F-bomb was pretty damn funny. Okay, but how funny would it have been if they stayed in character and just said, "Oh bother"? I probably would have lost my mind. Story 3. I have a close friend who was Woody for a while at Disneyland. He said that one time the float had caught on fire during a show, and they had to play it off completely in character. They danced around it and had to quickly get it backstage to deal with the problem. He said they played it off well enough that no one seemed to notice / there wasn't any panic. He said he had never seen an instance of anyone breaking character because everyone was very well trained, and there's always at least 6 or so cameras that can see you at all times. I also one time offered an unopened water bottle to an employee when it was nearly 100 degrees, and he said if anyone at Disney saw that, he would be fired. They can't take anything from guests. He also mentioned the cameras constantly watching both crew and patrons. Story 4. Not a character, but my family went to Disney World a few times when I was a kid. My dad was abusive, physically and verbally. We eventually left him when I was 12. He was awful on vacations for just being miserable in general. It was Valentine's Day and my mom, dad, older sister, and I were at one of the parks. I don't remember which. All of the characters had big red hearts on a string around their necks. My sister was at oldest 8 and I would have been 6. We had just gotten ice cream and my sister and I excitedly looked around for our favorite characters. My sister saw Eeyore, her all-time favorite character. So she turned around and my dad, not paying attention, ran into my sister holding her ice cream cone and got it on his shirt. He hauls off and smacks her in the side of the face, knocking her glasses and making her drop her ice cream. She starts crying as my mom starts giving him crap while he defended his actions, saying she should have watched where she was going. The next thing we know, my sister is being hugged by Eeyore. It shocked her out of crying, and she was so suddenly incredibly happy because Eeyore just kept hugging her while my mom started taking pictures. Eeyore then stopped hugging my sister, only to point to his paper heart, and then to her, and then he hugged her again. There's a picture somewhere in my mom's basement of my sister and I standing with Eeyore. My sister beaming, but clearly looking like she'd been crying. I still think about that Eeyore to this day and wondered what they were thinking. It was the early 90s when people were still largely expected to mind their own business when it came to such things. And reading these other comments makes me realize he may not have been able to do anything else anyway, but I appreciate his gesture nonetheless. Thanks, Eeyore. What kind of piece of garbage do you have to be to hit your child at Disneyland? Like hitting your child in general, but at Disneyland? That dad is just, I don't know. Is just what's the most PG-13 way I can say it for YouTube? Just garbage, I think. The dad is garbage. Story 5. I wasn't a character but worked closely with them as a photographer. Disney performers are trained to never break character for whatever reason. They have ways of signaling their character attendant when they are in distress, and it's generally up to the character attendant to avoid any weird or uncomfortable situations. As far as weird situations, they do get people that stalk them in the park. Like some people get in those lines multiple times to take a photo with a specific performer. The weird side of Disney fanatics is something else. Story 6. Worked at a Disney store in late 87 and 88 in Orange County, California. I think at the time it was like one of only a handful of stores open. The back of the store had a big screen where we constantly played some Disney video. Every once in a while, the biggest, muscular, blackest, gayest dude would come in and kindly request that we play anything Pooh related. He'd then proceed to prance around the store. He came in the evenings towards closing, and he would sing the Tigger parts of either dialogue or any song. Turns out he was one of the Tiggers at Disneyland. Dude just loved being Tigger. Story 7. I wouldn't say break, but I was a lifeguard and I had to ban this kid from going down the water slide. Every single time I told him he had to be feet first, and every time he'd say, okay, but he kept going down head first. And it got to the point where other kids saw him and were copying him. He left and cried to mom and dad, and I explained to mom and dad why. They left and cried to my coordinator, and my coordinator came back saying that wasn't very magical of me. I explained after several times of this kid not listening, other kids were copying him. In any case, I got a stern talking to about being a nice lifeguard who explains why, versus the mean lifeguard who just yells orders. Later that day, the kid was running across the deck, despite several requests not to, tripped and ate concrete. Don't hate me. I don't feel bad. I don't feel bad either. This kid was given all the tools to make the right decision and didn't. That is not OP's fault. Story 8. WDW character department at Magic Kingdom many years ago. I can't remember breaking character, but I do remember working the restaurant at the Contemporary for dinners. One time we had a Make-A-Wish kid as a guest, and they were just the most awesome kid. And it was just heartbreaking to know why they were there. So our lead let us do a group hangout with the kid for something like an hour in costume, playing and running around and having fun. You can never play like that in the parks, you'd start a kid riot. No consequences, we just hoped that we made the little kid happy. Bonus fun fact, the Goofy costume for the Electric Light Parade was worn by a float driver. Because the driver was seated, no pants with that costume. Just a glittery top and head and gloves. Story 9. At a character meal with Eric, Ariel, Rapunzel, and Flynn. Everything went as normal, though they probably noticed my son was more interested in chatty than most boys his age. After the meal, the characters are in a cornered-off area taking pictures with a bunch of adults individually, who seem to be part of a corporate event. The adults don't seem that interested. Eric sees my son staring at them longingly while we wait for my wife and daughter to finish in the bathroom. He slyly sends a handler to chat with us, and a minute later, when the last corporate dude is done, she invites us for a private hangout. We start to go over, but I'm torn whether to wait for my wife and daughter to come out, but not wanting to deny my son any time, since the characters obviously won't be able to stay for long. Eric probably visited our table an hour ago, but immediately remembers us and recognizes the dilemma, and suggests my son and I spend time with his friends, and he'll make sure my wife and daughter join us. Sure enough, he spots them before I do, and my daughter is greeted in the lobby with Eric asking her to join him because Ariel was dying to see her again. She had told them that Ariel was her favorite princess. We ended up spending probably 10 minutes in just a little nook with them, chatting and being silly. The actors probably gave up any break time they had between meal sittings to do that for my kid. I could tell a dozen stories like this about the actors there, and my kids will always have a sense of wonder and magic thanks to them. Story 10. A face performer broke character for my husband and I won't say which park, but we took a trip to Disney about 2 months after our infant son died. He was our first. Our entire nursery was Neverland/Peter Pan themed. We always wanted to take him to Disney and have him meet Peter. Well, he couldn't. I got a memorial tattoo, an exact replica of my son's hospital ink handprint, and we got a picture of Peter Pan with the tattoo. We were alone with him and his handler. I tearfully explained the situation before asking him to pose with my arm. He took lots of photos with my tattoo and us. And afterward, he hugged me tight, told me he was proud of me and God bless us, and he was so sorry for our loss. It was amazing, emotional, and I'll never forget that Peter Pan was proud of me for finding the strength to keep on living. It honestly meant the world. I'm so glad he broke character. I'll always treasure those photos and that memory. Is that even really out of character though? Like, okay, I get it. I've seen some fan videos too of like, oh, Peter Pan's actually a weirdo jerk. But hey, this seems like something that any Disney character, well, Disney protagonist would do, doesn't it? A lot of those characters have a lot of sensitivity to them. I definitely hope the Disney higher-ups didn't bust his balls about this one, because it sounds really sweet. Story 11. My neighbor, he died a couple of years ago, so I'm safe in telling this, worked at Disney for years. One day he was stocking shelves in a gift shop and came around the corner and nearly ran into none other than Paul and Linda McCartney. Before he could stop himself, he loudly exclaimed, "Holy crap, it's the McCartneys!" He immediately realized how big of a breach of Disney cast member etiquette he had just committed, and turned 12 shades of red. But before anything bad could happen, Paul and Linda just smiled and laughed and introduced themselves. Apparently, they were wonderfully laid back about such things and were quite used to surprised reactions when people recognized them in public. He didn't get into any trouble. His boss saw the whole episode and thought it was hilarious, and I think they both signed a hat or something for him as they were checking out. Story 12. Visitant from last year here. On the Halloween night, I've seen 2 female employees working in the store, not characters though, clearly upset by some kind of superior order. The exact dialogue was, "Yeah, sometimes it gets hard." "I know it does, but that attitude was unacceptable." I didn't resist and said, "I guess even in Disney working sometimes sucks." The first girl immediately stood up and smiled as bright as she could. "What do you mean? Working here is awesome every time." I couldn't help but feel that she was agreeing with me, but never breaking the Happy Land face. Awesome place. Story 13. My mom was a costumed character for a couple of years at Disneyland. She was very committed to keeping character. But there was one instance where she broke it. 2 teens jumped her when she was playing Piglet and started beating her. At first, she just tried to block and defend herself, but at one point she knocked one of the boys to the ground and pinned him. Considering my mom's only 4'10" and she was wearing 50 pounds of costume, I consider that fairly impressive. The other kid continued to assault her, and I think she may have yelped or cried out, because the kid she had pinned heard her and said, "Oh crap, it's a chick." Yeah, no crap, dumb idiot. Most of the shorter characters are women because, well, they're shorter. Cast members came to help her, and the kids were banned from the park. My mom got into a lot of trouble for that too, though, because she broke character. If I recall correctly, she was suspended for a couple of days. How does this make any sense? This makes me so mad. What is she supposed to do? At some point, adrenaline just takes over, like these 2 kids are beating the crap out of me. And some Disney exec is like, "Well, actually, Piglet would just sit there and take it." Shut up. Story 14. Story time. I have 3 cousins who have been Disney princesses, 2 of which are still at it. About a year ago, my grandparents decided to visit one of my cousins out at Disneyland Tokyo. My grandpa has relatively advanced Alzheimer's, but he is generally easy to handle. Anyway, somehow he got separated from my grandma and started to panic a little, looking for anyone he knew. Turns out the first person he found that he recognized was my cousin in full Cinderella character. They allow the characters to come out and walk around the park in Tokyo because the Japanese are super respectful. He started to talk to my cousin, calling her by her real name and quite directly asking her where his wife/her parents were. He started to get pretty angry and frustrated when she wouldn't give him a straight answer. She kept character as best she could, but her handlers whisked her away pretty rapidly. She was reunited with the rest of the group soon after, but it was quite the scene. Additional note/edit. Yes, it was tragic. Disney could/should show a little more leniency. My extended family just tries to remember it as a ridiculous chain of events and not as a traumatic one. It ended up being relatively okay in the end. Alzheimer's is a crappy disease, and I guess we think that it's still better to include my grandpa in family events and risk these kinds of things happening than to lock him up in some room somewhere, even though there he would be completely safe. I wasn't actually there, so I'm sure I'm missing some details. Wasn't expecting this to get as popular as it did. Story 15. They do not break character. My best childhood friend is a face character. During the interviews, they bring you through a ton of challenging scenarios, like kid with lost parents, kids who act mean, etc. If you break character, there are 1,000 other people of your exact height and hair color ready to play the character better than you. They even made her do an impression of a Disney character without speaking. She had to be able to portray the essence of the character, and if they couldn't guess who she wrote down, her interview was over. They are incredibly serious about staying in character. Anytime anything bad would happen that they should break character, their handler would just guide them away and handle it themselves. Bonus info. She isn't allowed to tell anyone who she plays except family and friends or post anything about work on social media for the entirety of her time at Disney, or else she will be fired. Story 16. Highly doubt this will get read, but I have a story of someone I know who used to do the mascot stuff at Disney. Back a couple years ago, he had to dress up as Nick from Zootopia for his shift. Now, the thing about this costume is that the tail is a massive metal spring to help give the illusion that it can move on its own. With that out of the way, one day he was doing his rounds with his partner, Judy, and they had a bit of a troublemaker, 11-ish boy, who was being rough and pulling on his tail. Keep in mind, this tail is pretty heavy at around 40 pounds and is attached to his back pretty firmly. With no real proper field of vision other than the tunnel vision they get, no breaking character and no security nearby to stop the issue, he was in a bit of a pickle. Fortunately for Nick, the father of said troublemaker told him to stop and apologize. He did so with a sour disposition that gave the impression that he really didn't care. After said apology, a young girl behind him goes, "Hey Nick, and without missing a beat, he does a complete 180, attempting to hit the troublemaker with his tail. He gets his chance and smacks the kid with a good thud and knocks the kid on his butt. While he was giving attention to the little girl, his mind was racing that he was going to get fired for this little stunt. But luckily for him, the dad pulls through by laughing at the kid's misfortune, telling him something along the lines of, "You know you deserved that, right?" He had some other stories of some of the stupid stuff they would do, but for real, they drill it in hard into your head. To not break character, period. Story 17. Not a character, but a security guard. At Disney, security has a character too. Look intimidating, and we can be. We've got a ton of different passageways and some lovely cells we will love to lock you up into, if we need to. Well, this one day there was a domestic case at the parks. The cops took Dad away, and I, from that point, was to escort Mom and her little boy to their hotel room, as they were worried that the dad would somehow sneak back onto the property. They were very afraid. I was walking them, and I hear the mother talking softly to her son. "You see, your mama's strong, and we'll be just fine, the two of us. We're gonna have a great trip. See that lady?" She gestures to me. "See, she's a girl too, and look at how tough she is. I bet they gave us the toughest guard around." Well, later I get called again when they were ready to go to the parks, as they were still paranoid that Dad would come back. I was walking them, and the little boy looks up at me and says, "Miss, I'm scared. Are you sure we're going to be okay?" And I stopped, knelt down to his level, and said, "You're going to be just fine. Your mommy's really tough," and she was right, I'm tough too. And best of all, my best friend Mickey Mouse made sure to tell all the strongest, toughest people in the park to protect you today. He put extra magic to make sure you two have a great day, so don't worry, just have fun. He brightened up and gave me a hug, and it was the first time I almost cried on the job. Story 18. It must have been 2008, and I went to Disneyland with my friend. Borat was the hottest movie ever, and I happened to stumble upon a shirt that had the outline of Kazakhstan and the words, "Spring Break Kazakhstan. It's nice." We ended up at some photo op with Pluto, and he made a big fuss about my shirt, without saying anything of course, just acting excited. When the photographer said cheese, the guy in the Pluto costume yelled, "Very nice." That was a funny and unexpected moment of broken character. Story 19. I auditioned to be a face character at Disneyland, and made it to the stage where they run through the scenarios of unruly guests, rude comments, etc. And you have to respond and come up with responses in character. My dance teacher was a face more than 20 years ago, and she had all kinds of stories of people trying to reach up her skirt. She was Pocahontas mainly. In the end, I'm glad I didn't make it through. At the time, it was barely above minimum wage, like $6.75 an hour or something. Story 20. Ex-cast member here. While not a character myself, I did have to work on the parade route from time to time, making sure kids didn't dart out in front of floats and such. Friends of characters would often be playful with CMs along the parade route, winking, making silly faces, etc. There was one day where Baloo came up to me mid-dance and proceeded to bow to me. Baloo also happened to be wearing some sort of crown/hat thing with a star on the top. Baloo probably wasn't aware of how tall that actually made him. Baloo managed to smack me right in the mouth with that star, cutting it open and giving me a fat lip. Fairly certain I heard Baloo audibly gasp when they stood upright again. Paused to mouth, immediately stopped dancing, just stared at me as I bled. They tried to grab my hands and pull me to them, but their handler came and ushered them along. Oops. Story 21. I don't work for Disney, but I work for Party Princess Productions that does Disney birthday parties on the weekends. I was Darth Vader in Malibu for this kid's birthday. It was only him, which was rare, but we had fun. We played lightsaber hide-and-go-seek, where when he finds me, we duel. I had him practice the Force on me, helping him focus and tossing me to the wall. In the middle of all the fun, the kid starts coughing. It's subtle at first and then gets worse. Gets to the point where he's not breathing anymore and he's not moving. I took off my helmet and was about to perform CPR when his mother came out with his inhaler. She told me he can't play anymore because he has bad asthma, and it gets worse the more active he is. I put the helmet back on and played things off. We opened presents together and I left. To this day, I hate that mother for watching me play with her kid knowing his condition and not telling me a word until the poor kid nearly suffocated. I called my boss and told her that I need to know all medical conditions before the party right away from now on. I hope that kid had fun. I still feel horrible for almost killing him from teaching him the ways of the dark side. Story 22. Obligatory not me, but my best friend is a very popular face character and she's told me some hilarious stories. One time though, when she nearly broke character was when she was doing a meet and greet thing. A young autistic boy came in who got very overexcited and yanked her wig off. They put hundreds of bobby pins in your hair to keep them on, so you can imagine the pain. And she had to restrain herself so hard to not scream out. She said the wig was hanging off of her head, and everyone in the room just froze. The little boy started crying hysterically and had to be rushed from the room. They ended up closing her room for a bit so she could get fixed up. but she said it was a pretty crazy moment. Apparently, the parents were so embarrassed, they didn't even say anything to her and just bolted from the room with the boy.